All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to just, first of all, welcome to all of you. I'm really glad you could make it. We'll be having 5 of these sessions on Thursday, so I hope many of you can come to many of them. I wanted to start out by just briefly talking about why we're going through the strategic planning process that we are, and give you a few details about the committee and about how all the mechanisms we've set up so far for people to be able to provide input to the process. So first of all, why are we even doing this? The School of Engineering has not gone through a strategic planning process in memorable history, interestingly. And with new leadership, we thought this would be a good time to just think about what it's going to take for our school to remain the best engineering school in the world for the next 10 to 20 years. So we've historically been a great school. Why would we change anything? Well, engineering is changing, and we need to spend a little time thinking about how things are changing and how we stay at the very top of our game. And in fact, why not, while we're at it, think about how we could get even better, right? And so that's our goal, is to think deeply about the mission of the school, how we can have even more impact than we've had, how we can affect the world, affect the people of the world in good ways. So, all good stuff. On a practical matter, we also should think about what it will take us to do those things. Maybe we'll want to grow a little bit, maybe we'll want to change a little bit, and so that's a practical outcome as well. Our goal is to deliver a report by the end of May. This is going to be a short process by strategic planning standards, but we're engineers, and I'm absolutely sure that we can do it. Okay, so we had a small group of faculty in the fall, 5 faculty and myself, who were to think about the process itself. It was very hard for us not to start planning, actually. We weren't allowed to plan. We were allowed to plan the plan. And most of them are here. Raise your hand if you were on that little group. We had a lot of fun. We talked to a lot of high-level leadership in the university to get ideas about how to plan. So finally, we're actually planning. And we have, and the one thing I wanted to add is that we want to communicate with everybody, and we did come up with a set of slides from the pre-planning committee, and those will be put on the website. You have a URL for the website, but we'll probably send it out repeatedly as we keep adding things to the website. So we want to be open about everything, and you'll see what the thoughts were of that small pre-planning group. So one thing that group did was think about the structure of, that's my seat, Mark, don't grab it, was to think about the structure of the committee itself. And we do have a committee, and you have to have a committee, but we still want to hear from everybody in the school who wants to talk to us about the process. Let me just tell you about the composition of the committee. So we have 2 co-chairs, myself and Arun Majumdar. Where are you, Arun? Who's going to introduce himself as well. And I'm from CS and from the Dean's office now, and Arun is from ME and rather new to Stanford. We have one faculty member from every department, and we focused on younger people. So it's mid-career faculty, and it's an incredible group of faculty. We had our first meeting this morning, and it was a lot of fun. We have a couple of faculty outside the School of Engineering, more senior people. We have 3 students on the committee, an undergraduate who's going into a co-term, we have a PhD student, and we have a graduate who's now in the joint MBA MSCS program. We have a staff member, and we have the executive director of the D School. And we had an interesting D-School-like exercise this morning with the committee that was a lot of fun, getting to know each other and thinking about what impact means in the School of Engineering. So that's, in some ways, what this is all about, which is impact. So that's the committee. Committee members maybe can raise your hand. Right? And so now you see who they are. That will also be posted on the website, the list of committee members and all their email addresses, so that you can get in touch with them. So the last thing I wanted to do before Arun says just a few words is tell you the mechanisms we have so far for people to get involved, people outside the committee. There will be more, and we're open to suggestions. So first of all, these 5 Thursday events, as we get to our talks, we'd like people to interrupt. I hope that's okay with our speakers, and we'll have lots of discussion, and then after the talks we'll have as much time to talk as people would like to hang around. The committee, or some members of the committee, will be visiting all of the departments and going to faculty meetings to see all the faculty. We will offer one-on-one meetings with anybody who wants to talk to a committee member at any time. You could talk to the representative from your department. That's my chair. That's
Thank you. I love this.
Right, okay, yeah. We will offer one-ones to, I'm not controlling. We will offer one-ones to anybody who wants them. We're going to send out surveys. We are going to work on a discussion forum for that website, and we're going to try to think about creative ways to do that. And any other ways you can think of. We want this to be a very inclusive process. We also don't want it to be a departmental process. Nevertheless, we're going to start out with these 5 meetings, hearing from the departments, because those are the sort of the modules that we have in the school at this point in time. But we'd like this process to be school-wide, not particularly broken down in department boundaries. So that's all I had to say. Maybe Arun can say a few words. We can see if there's any questions about the process, and then we can go on to today's presentations. So, and wait, don't say anything yet. We're being recorded, so tell your friends who aren't here. But that means we have to repeat any questions from the audience, because that's the sole microphone.
Since it's being recorded, she's the real chair. Glad to be co-chair. But I just, first of all, I think this is going to be a lot of fun, because the people involved in this, the committee members, are just absolutely fantastic. I think it's, when I first came, and this is my second quarter at Stanford, and this was being proposed, and Persis twisted my arm to do this. I said, has there been something like this done before? And the answer was no, which is kind of very interesting, because this is not only going to be a challenge, it's going to be a huge opportunity. Because if you have done something without the planning, perhaps we could do better. And I think that's what Jennifer was talking about. Or maybe not, we'll see. But I think this is the process. What we would really like to come up with is, what should we look like, and what do we want to do 10 to 15 years from now? And this is going to be, it's sort of a vision. And there are going to be themes that we'll come up with. And this is something that we have to be a little ahead of the game. And a great example of a theme is what Stanford did. And at that time, I was on the other side of the bay. What Stanford did is GCEP. When no one was talking about energy and climate, Stanford came and put itself on the map and saying that we're going to do GCEP. Now, and after that, a lot of people followed. And MIT followed, Berkeley followed after that, et cetera. And I think that's the kind of level where I think we should look at what the future could be, and put ourselves on the line, stretch ourselves a little bit. The other thing I think is very important is that if we're going to try out a few ideas. If we succeed in all of them, maybe we're not trying hard enough. And I think it'll be good to put some stretch goals out there that maybe we should try, but we may fail. It's okay. And we'll learn from that, and we'll iterate, and we'll get better. And so I think this is going to be a very interesting exercise. As Jennifer pointed out, we want to be as open and transparent as possible. We want feedback from everyone. And then we'll huddle sometime in end of March or so. We'll huddle, and we'll see what has come up, and then we'll try to filter that. That's our job, is to come up with those themes and what we need to get in terms of the mechanisms with the faculty, with the space and others, to get to our vision. So that's all I'll say. And if there's any questions and all, otherwise we'll just go straight into the presentations.
All right, you guys
Right.
are on. 20 minutes each with 10 minutes of questions, approximately. And I think people should feel free to interrupt. You comfortable with that?
Sure, as long as the total then is 30 minutes.
Okay. Total of 30, use it as you like. Except don't talk the whole time.
Right, right. Can we reduce the lights? So what I'd like to do this afternoon is, since many of you may not know a lot about the bioengineering department, I'd like to review the history and what the current state of the department is, especially with regards to research and education. We recently drafted a strategic plan, and that informs our thoughts about where the department ought to be going. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and I want to thank Jennifer Cochran, who led the committee that worked on that, and actually all of the faculty who were very engaged in that process. And so with that, I'll give you our fairly strong vision of what the future for bioengineering and bioengineering at Stanford. The Department of Bioengineering is very young. It was co-founded in 2002 jointly by the School of Engineering and the School of Medicine. The mission I have written here with some points highlighted in yellow. It's to create a fusion of engineering and the life sciences, and that fusion is important. Engineering and physical sciences on the one hand, life sciences on the other, that promotes scientific discovery, that is very basic work, through invention of new technologies and therapies, through research and education. So a tremendous breadth in this fusion of physical sciences and life sciences for basic discovery and for solving important problems that face society. The department sits in both schools. The faculty are members of both schools, and the schools share equally in the finances of the department. The advantage of being in both schools is we get intellectual thrusts from the two schools, from the School of Medicine, which is, as you'll see, one of the main areas of application for bioengineering, though certainly not the only one, and obviously the excellence in engineering methods that comes from the School of Engineering. On top of that, we are part of a great university, and so we get to interact with sister departments in other schools besides the two schools that we are under. And as I said, we have thrusts that span everything from very basic to very translational. On the basic end, the core of the department is a quantitative and mechanistic understanding of biology. It's a little bit more unusual than biology as you may have learned it in high school and in college, in that we seek to understand it in a very quantitative way so that you can use it as an engineering substrate, and you can understand it well enough that you can engineer things for it. Translation of those basic sciences then both to develop research tools as well as technologies that are deployable throughout society. And with respect to those translations, I want to emphasize that we envision medical applications as well as non-medical applications of bioengineering. So when we talk amongst ourselves and say, so what do we want to do? What do we want to be known for? The answer is we want to solve problems that are important to society. And there are many that are addressable by bioengineering. I list some of them here: human health, environment, food, energy. In fact, if you look at the grand challenges that were developed by the National Academy of Engineering and you look through that list, there's a number that really resonate with what bioengineering can offer. Engineering the tools for scientific discovery, advancing health informatics, engineering better medicines, and reverse engineering the brains. These come straight out of the NAE grand challenges. In addition, we are in a very new field. And if you go to bioengineering or biomedical engineering or biological engineering departments throughout the country and throughout the world, they're very different. The field is still evolving, and we want to be there defining what the field is. And to us, bioengineering spans all of those various names that I just used. It includes biomedical engineering, but is not limited to medical applications. It includes biological engineering, but is much more applied, I think, than most biological engineering departments are. Here's the growth of the department faculty since the department was created back in the early 2000s. We started with a small number of founding faculty that were drawn from faculty who were here at Stanford at the time, and initiated a graduate program very quickly, especially targeted to PhD degrees. Around 2010, we opened an undergraduate major as an IDP. And as I'll say a little bit more about that, our current undergraduate major still is an IDP. We expect that to become fully open, excuse me, next fall. I have a cold, so I hope I sound okay. And then here, just a few months ago, is when the Shriram Center opened. I think it's great that Eric and I are sharing the stage, since we also share that building. It's a wonderful, wonderful building. Thank you, especially to the people who are here and helped through all of that planning and building. It's a tremendous resource for us and for chemical engineering. The current size of the department is as shown here. We have 25 core faculty using 16.5 plus 1 billet. Plus 1 is because 1, I guess you would say, is a rubber band billet from the ChemH Institute. And the academic rank of our faculty as of today, you see there as well. It's really very nice demographic, fairly well balanced between senior faculty and junior faculty. We are expecting 1 new assistant professor to arrive this spring. And the growth of the department will continue. I'll say a few more words about that as we go. This is leveraged through 18 courtesy faculty, 5 consulting professors, and 5 lecturers. We currently have 123 graduate students, the vast majority of which are PhD students. We have a fairly small terminal master's program. And currently, 61 plus students. The plus is because students are still declaring. So 61 is the number of students that have already declared, and we expect that number to grow. The state of the department is really quite strong. Our faculty are quite prominent in their specialties, and as you see, we've been quite successful in garnering major awards. We have 11 National Academy memberships. This includes individuals who have more than 1. Lemelson MIT Award, 6 Pioneer Awards, which is like off the charts compared to other departments, 2 Translational R01s, which are also very competitive NIH awards, 2 HHMI investigators, and 2 Nakasone awards. The faculty produce very high impact papers in important journals. We're very successful with extramural research. I'll show you some numbers. Because of all of this, prospective students, especially graduate students, find the department attractive. We, this current year, have 520, I think the number is, graduate student applications. And the stature of the department is rising. Informally, I can tell you when I travel and visit sister institutions, I hear great things and how impressed people are with our department. Our ranking in U.S. News and World Report, if you like those, is number 5. With respect to our undergraduate program, through the current year, we're still an IDP, and we expect, as I mentioned earlier, to throw the doors open next fall. The curriculum is much as you would expect. It has basic sciences, math, and engineering. Core classes start the sophomore year. And includes things like lots of labs and capstone project and depth courses. Where do these students go? I think like undergraduates throughout the university, they tend to go on to further education. Stanford students tend to do that, although some do go to the job market right away. Most go on to graduate school or some professional school. This chart shows you the number of degrees that we've granted. Undergraduate degrees. This year was a bit of an anomaly in that it was higher than we would have expected. This is more where we expect to be in the next year or 2, and then we expect it to rise significantly over the coming 5 years or so. I say that because, first of all, if you compare us to departments in similar size engineering schools, we would think we should be in the 60, 70 range in terms of the number of majors per year. 76 students took Bio E80 or E80, which is a freshman class this past spring. 106 freshmen and sophomores have expressed interest in bioengineering. So the number of bioengineering majors is likely to rise, and I would say roughly double from where we are right now. The graduate program has a master's degree that is entirely core-based. It has, course-based. It has a course sequence that includes laboratory courses as well as depth electives. It can be completed in 1 year. PhD degree adds the requirements to that are very typical of other PhD programs at Stanford. And all of our PhD students are funded. No PhD students pay their own way. Our enrollment used to be limited by the fact that they take these lab classes and we had no facilities. That limit is now gone with the opening of the Shriram Center. And the other limit is the fellowship funding that's available, and we've been successful in developing resources for that, so the size of our PhD class, as you'll see, is growing. That's shown here. In orange is the number of core faculty. In yellow is the number of matriculated PhD students each of those years. And you see that we fell below a ratio of 1 to 1. We'd like to be somewhat above that. And then this past year, we increased the number of students since we can handle them in the new building and we have enough funding to provide fellowship support for them. So we have outstanding applicants, as do all of you. Yes, Allison.
I was just curious if a lot of bioengineering faculty advise PhD students from other departments.
Yes, it goes both ways, right? So we have bioengineering faculty advising students from other departments, and we have bioengineering students among these that get advised by faculty who are not our core faculty. And we feel very strongly that that ought to be left open in that way. And we continue to fund them. We have slightly different funding plans for students who are in a lab of one of our core faculty versus not, but we certainly don't cut them off. I mentioned the success that we have in extramural research. This is total grant expenditures over the past several years. You see a nice upward trend with the current number being on the order of $35 million a year. The total expenditures of the department is about $48 million, so almost 80% of the expenditures of the department is from grants and contracts. They're divided here into two wedges, the blue and whatever this color, purple, is because some of our faculty route their grants through other departments. So this groups together the grants of our core faculty regardless of what department the grants were routed through. Now, I mentioned that the core of our department, the core of the discipline as we see it, is quantitative biology. And when the department was started, we said, okay, that's the core, and then surrounding it are these specialization areas, and we started with these 5, and you see them listed there. And then we viewed application areas of these various specializations throughout medicine and also outside of medicine. This is how we described the department up until a couple of years ago. And we found this to be quite limiting. We especially don't like the silos that tend to be created by these specialization areas. We wanted very much to break those. It also had the problem that faculty didn't necessarily see themselves in any one of these very nicely and just didn't fit well what the department was becoming. So the new way that we define the department is in this way. Measuring, making, and modeling. Those are the things that we do. We measure things, we make things, and we model them. And we do this with biology, of biology, and for biology. And I'll give you examples of those sorts of definitions. And the purpose of this is to understand, harness, and interact with biology in all of the ways that you see listed here. So here's our regular logo, and we add to that measure, model, and make. Here's an example of measure. This is from the work of Steve Quake, who's known for the development of microfluidics, which allows you to run biological and chemical experiments with very small amounts of fluid. He's also developed ways of sequencing from single molecules and also sequenced his own genome. He then went on and used those sorts of tools to develop a way to measure very, very small amounts of fetal DNA floating in maternal blood in order to be able to sense genetic abnormalities in the fetus from a sample of maternal blood, and showed that he could diagnose, these techniques could be used to diagnose Down syndrome. Really quite an amazing feat. Already to date, more than 1 million women have been spared having to have amniocentesis or an invasive test. And if you look at the side effects of these invasive tests, one would predict that at least 5,000 lives have been saved. This is from the work of Jennifer Cochran, again in the area of measuring and trying to do multiple experiments in parallel. She and Tom Baer have made high throughput chips that now have 1 million experiments going on in them, and then you can assay them and probe them with a laser. Just phenomenal technology. Drew Endy, who's here in the audience, has been doing work. This is now in the area of making biological constructs that behave like logic circuits in electronics, but to do this from life forms. And so these are organisms that you create that behave like logic gates. And if 2 inputs are both present and you've designed this to be an XOR gate, then that's what the output is going to be. And he's shown that they behave very much like you would expect logic circuits to behave, with turning on and off in that way. This is from the work of Jennifer Cochran, again in the area of making, where here she's making proteins designed to have particular function. There are receptors in cancer cells that if ligands come in and attach to those receptors, it tends to trigger metastatic growth from those tumors, the generation of metastases. And she's designed proteins that can attach and inhibit those receptors, and thereby inhibit the creation of metastatic tumors. And here you see the impact of that in mouse models of cancer, both in ovarian and breast cancer, where the treated animals have much lower incidence of metastatic disease. In the area of modeling, this is from the work of Russ Altman in PharmGKB, this area of pharmacogenomics, where you try to harness large amounts of data that are available and try to make predictions of which drugs will work in which patients based on their gene expressions, and also what drugs might be reusable and be used in other indications other than the ones that they were originally designed for. Another example of work in the area of modeling is the work of Marcus Covert, where if you really think you understand biology, and I mentioned the importance of understanding biology in a quantitative and mechanistic way, you should be able to make predictions of how an organism will behave in the same way that you make predictions of the path that a ball will take if you throw it up in the air. And they've managed to form a computer model of an entire cell that can make predictions of how the cell will function based on its genome.
So Norbert, we're at 20 minutes now,
Okay.
and we want to hear about your strategic plan.
All right.
Have time for discussion.
I was interrupted. Blame Allison. So an example of something on the very basic side, and I'll say something about basic and translation. This is work from Zev Bryant, who's working on molecular motors. These are really nifty things that cause things to move around in cells. Well, again, if you think you understand this, you ought to be able to tinker with them and redesign them. And he's made molecular motors that you can alter, essentially with gear shifts that you control with light. So you turn on light, and these molecular motors speed up, or they change directions, really proving that you know what these motors are doing and that you know how to engineer them. In the area of more translatable work, Manu Prakash's work on the fold scope, I'm sure you've seen. Biomedical translation we do through several mechanisms, including the Biodesign Program and our Coulter Foundation-funded translational work in biomedical applications. The Coulter program is funded internally, has given $5.6 million in grants to 55 projects. Those projects went on to get $540 million in outside funding and have already impacted patients. Similarly, the Biodesign Program has led to the creation of all of these companies and over 300,000 patients treated with products that were generated by these spin-off companies. So, our strategic plan. Our definition of bioengineering is very broad. It's a fusion of engineering and the life sciences. I mentioned that. It spans from engineering for biology, making tools for biology, through to the use of biology as a substrate for engineering and for manufacturing. It spans from basic discovery through invention of new technologies and application to any area that's important to society, including health, but not limited to health, including food, environment, energy, and so on. The importance of these other areas is shown here in this slide from Drew, where you see the growth in terms of economic output of biological engineering for biologics, and then also shown on here are crops and industrial applications. Those are each at least as large as the biomedical applications. So we think that the opportunities for bioengineering, not only at Stanford but in society, are extraordinary. And here's a thought. We think that bioengineering could fuel the next stage in economic growth, much as electrical engineering and computer science have done till now. Now, if that is to happen, Stanford should be there driving that. And that's what we want to do. So, clearly, that is an enormous task. And one thing that I want to make clear is bioengineering at Stanford is larger than the bioengineering department. There is no way that the bioengineering department can do all of those things. Before the department was even created, there was bioengineering research going on in all of the departments in the School of Engineering. And that's a great thing. We embrace that. And there's bioengineering happening outside of the School of Engineering as well. That whole thing is much larger than what the department can do, but we want to be right there as the nidus for all of this activity at this fusion of life science and engineering. So what we expect to do over the next 5 years is complete the first stage in the department development that was designed when the department was created in 2002, continue to grow our faculty, especially in areas currently not served, and I mentioned some of those in my talk, and then build new research initiatives in this area, this very broad area that I described, in close partnership with other programs, both within the School of Engineering as well as beyond the School of Engineering. I'm done.
Okay, thank you. So we have time for a few questions. So I actually have one. It's not really a question, but it's a request. As sitting on the School of Engineering XCOM, I see bioengineering going on in all kinds of departments, as you said. It might be useful for people, for you to talk a little bit about that. Like material science, there's bioengineering going on. Electrical engineering, it's all over the place. Maybe you could just mention for a couple minutes the
collaborations that we have, sure.
And the very strong bioengineering work that's happening in other departments.
So the question was to talk a little bit about bioengineering activities that are going on in other departments and the linkages that we have, and I'd like to say the linkages that we hope to have made even stronger. So you mentioned material science. Sarah Heilshorn comes to mind. She is a courtesy appointed in bioengineering and is very active in our department. She does great work in biomaterials. In electrical engineering, there's a fair amount of activity, but we're currently working with electrical engineering on a possible joint recruit of a senior person who'd work in the area at the interface between silicon and life. It's really a very exciting area, but the kind of work that goes on in electrical engineering related to bioengineering is especially in the area of making of devices that are relevant to biology. So imaging devices of various kinds, sensors, and things like that. Mechanical engineering arguably has the longest history in bioengineering activities at Stanford in the School of Engineering with the Biomechanical Engineering Division. In chemical engineering, we have one joint appointment with chemical engineering already, and we hope to grow that, especially now that we're in the same building. I see Margot here with ICME. We've done some things jointly with ICME, and we're currently working on a recruit of a faculty member who would be joint between us and also one of the medical school faculty. If you look at our courtesy appointments and secondary appointments, most of them are with medical school departments who really need to have far more connection to the School of Engineering. They view us as the conduit into the School of Engineering, which is great. But at our last retreat, we recognized that we cannot be the only entity within the School of Engineering that is reacting to the needs in healthcare. There essentially needs to be like a huge channel of activity joining the two schools, and we would like to help lubricate that, but there's no way that all of that can go through our department. Mark.
I agree that biology and bioengineering could be a new substrate that really leads to a great change in the overall economy and innovation and stuff like that. But that would require you to be pretty strategic about what role you want to play in that, because if the area is as big as you hope it is, and maybe we all hope it is, then the bioengineering department can't possibly do that.
Right.
Can't possibly grow that much. And yet, I didn't hear anything in the talk talking about strategically how you're thinking about playing that out. Because if you want to be at the precipice, the
Yes.
leader,
Right.
driving this way. Okay, that's great. So what strategy do you have to do that?
So we've talked about that, right? And what we want to do, maybe this is not answering the question. We want to be opportunistic, and we want to do the things that Stanford can be strong in. And let me give you an example of one that we've had a fair amount of discussion about, and sort of where I come down on it. Agriculture. Should we get engaged in bioengineering for agriculture? We don't have an agriculture school. In order for us to be successful in leveraging bioengineering into any of these other application areas, we have to have domain expertise. And I don't think we have it in the area of agriculture. But certainly in environment, we do. In energy, we do. And again, I don't mean to step on other departments' toes that are already working in those areas. It's just that I think that there's ways in which bioengineering can play into that. But I agree with you. We're a small department. We're a small university. Yet somehow this small university managed to impact Silicon Valley in the last few decades in the way that it did. So there's got to be a way to do that.
Any last-minute questions before we move on to chemical? All right, and Norbert, you'll be around afterwards.
Yes.
We'll have private questions. Thank you again.
You want the password?
No, it's okay. If I go. Okay, welcome. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about my favorite topic, which is the chemical engineering department, having spent 30 of my last 35 years in this department. As a graduate student to start, I am more than happy to talk to you about a department that is somewhere in the neighborhood of 54 years old, but has gone through a tremendous sea change, particularly in the last 10 to 15 years. Nothing indicates that more than these two different pictures here. This was our old digs, and this is our new digs. So this is the slums, and this is the Taj Mahal over here. And we celebrated our 50th anniversary about 4 to 5 years ago in the old digs, and now we're over here. That sea change actually is much more significant than just the building, and I'll go through this. So what I'd like to do first is introduce us. This is us, what we would call a small chemical engineering department, 15 core faculty, 4 assistant professors, 2 associate professors, and 9 full professors, covering a variety of topics. The senior faculty are very distinguished, as I think most of the engineering school senior faculty are, including 7 shared professors, 5 out of 8 potential NAE members, and we continue to win awards at the highest level. The top award's interesting because it's probably the premier Professional Progress Award in chemical engineering in the country from the ASHE. Zhenin Bao won it. It's now named after a Stanford alum, so this could be called the Stanford Award. And he's, Andy Akravos is also a new Stanford hero, so we're extremely proud of that. In terms of ranking, here's our present ranking. There are actually 2 U.S. News College rankings, one for undergraduate and one for graduate. The one that everybody quotes is the one on the right, so let me talk about that. It's also higher for us, which is we're number 3. Now, if you turn back the clock, actually, about 15 years ago, we were just regularly 6, around 6. And also our size was about 8 to 10 faculty. So we've done a couple of things. We've grown significantly, and we are going to continue to grow. And our vector is in the right direction in terms of our ranking. So we're quite happy about that. We consider our competition actually MIT. MIT has about 40 faculty, and so it's about twice our size. So the question is, how do we compete with only 15 faculty? And I think the primary way in which we do is we're actually bigger than our faculty through collaborations throughout the School of Engineering and throughout the university. We're also extremely picky about who we let in the door, both from a faculty point of view and from a student point of view. We're about 113 active PhD students, which is pretty significant for 15 faculty, 40 MS students, half of which are actually co-term. Our co-term master's program for our seniors is actually extremely popular now. About more than half of our seniors are actually co-term master's students. We have about 105 undergraduate students all the way down from some freshmen, but mostly sophomores, juniors, and seniors. So we view this as a small shop, but focused on the individual. I should say a very key individual beyond our faculty is our coming to be senior lecturer, Lisa Wang, who I'll mention as we go along. Now, I don't want to emphasize this so much, but I actually showed this slide at our retreat this year to indicate to our faculty that the sea change that we're undergoing hasn't stopped yet. So the top is a change, that's a 50-year-old change, meaning we have a new building after 50 years. But these 2 changes, that is new deans and a new department manager, are 15-year changes for us. So we're still in the process of seeing how this all is going to shake out and where we come out. So I cautioned our faculty and students we're still riding the wave. So where we come out on this is still a question. Now, let me give you a little bit of history of the department. The department is actually an outcropping of chemistry. So we originally were a very small department, somewhere around 5 or 6 faculty coming out of chemistry. The founding father of the department is Dave Mason. Dave Mason decided to grow the department in the tried and true way of stealing faculty from other faculties. And so he actually stole Michel Boudard from Berkeley. Michel then hired his student Bob Maddox, and this formed the basis for catalysis and surface science. And you could argue that Michel actually brought modern catalysis to chemical engineering. So he is one of the founding fathers. The other founding father we talk about is Andreas Akravos, who's our one transport god. That's God in the middle there, according to Michelangelo. And these are the 2 gods, our transport gods, Andy Akravos and Bud Holmesy. And then they begot this whole series of academic people, including myself, who are now scattered throughout other faculties. But we have a strong, when we started the department, it started catalysis and transport as primaries. And then it went from there. So we're talking about a department that started with 4 or 5 faculty and then eventually branched out. And Kurt hates when I do this, but he's one of the founding fathers of our soft materials issue. And then Channing Robertson, who's now emeritus, was our founder of our bioengineering part of chemical engineering. So that all was the start, and we were a very applied science department, non-technology. Now, what happened in the last 10 or 15 years is we've grown significantly, as you see, up to 15 people, spanning physics, chemistry, and biology. And the question is, why did we grow? And why did we become more technological? And part of the answer is that the field itself has changed. So it used to be that chemical engineering was dominated by the petrochemical industry. Now it's much broader than that. Big pharma has come in. We have a lots in the semiconductor manufacturing areas. And so the field itself broadened, alternative energy sources. And so we broadened with it first. And second, we also wanted to move from an applied science department, an outcropping of chemistry, to make impacts in technology. So we're now a much larger, more technological department that emphasizes molecular engineering. So everybody in our department is focusing on engineering molecules and molecular transformations for various kinds of technologies. We used to characterize ourselves this way, and this is a remnant of the starting point of the department. So we had transport, remember, rheology and soft materials. We had the catalysis and surface science, and then we had the bioengineering. And this is useful because it tells you what our skill set is. And I have us scattered along here. And just to add some faces to this, we have our catalysis set of people over here, and our energy set of people, which is Stacy, Tom, Matt, Teo, and Jens. Then we have transport people who are involved in complex fluids and complex flows. We have material scientists, particularly on the chemistry of soft materials, Kurt and Jenin. And then we have biophysicists, Andy Spakovitz and Alex Dunn. And finally, we have a cadre of card-carrying biochemists. And I should say that any chemical engineering department that's kind of worth its salt has a very significant bioengineering focus. So we have, as you see here, 5 faculty of our 15 that are focused on the biochemistry aspects of chemical engineering. Now, we don't characterize ourselves this way anymore. We characterize ourselves this way. The chemistry of life, the chemistry of energy, and the chemistry of environment. We do this because all of us, in some sense, are fully engaged in one of these 3 areas. That is, molecular transformations that affect life, human health, energy, or the environment. And this, as you see, this has brought us together. So this is how we characterize ourselves thematically. And in some sense, this is now our mission, to do research and teaching in the chemistry of life, the chemistry of energy, and the chemistry of environment. Now, I mentioned to you that we are bigger than our 15 faculty, and I've just drawn all the bridges here, all the connections that we have to entities on campus. Interestingly, the largest number of collaborations we have is actually with the School of Medicine, as you see, many departments, but we also have connections to SLAC. For example, we have Jens Norskov, who's a joint hire. We have a number of connections to H&S, and in fact, we have about 5 joint courtesy appointments in chemistry, some with the School of Earth Sciences, and then with most other School of Engineering departments, we also have joint faculty. So this is how we make our impact bigger than the 15 of us. This is our 5-year plan. We're actually in year 4 of our 5-year plan. It's a real nuts and bolts 5-year plan. It has these 4 elements. I'll go through each element and explain to you how we came up with these and why these are important to us. Number 1 was developing a chemical engineering energy conversion center focused on catalysis, so to bring energy kind of central to the department. What happened was when Michel Boudard retired, we had representation in surface science, not in making catalytic materials. And so we realized that that was centered to the core of energy technology, and we wanted to grow that. We have now done that, I think, very successfully. We have, as you saw, 4 or 5 faculty that are engaged specifically in catalytic energy. And in this center called SunCat, which Jens formed and is joint with SLAC, so that's been very successful for us. Our second element of our 5-year plan was to grow 3 incremental hires. We'd like to top out somewhere around 18. We actually listed areas, although we're again a best athlete department, so we have very broad searches, but we listed areas in which if we found a best athlete in them, we would be very interested. Notice that most of them are technological, so that we have technologies that we would like to make an impact in. That's very different from the early parts of our department. And then more than half of our undergraduates want to do either research in energy or research in sustainability or both. And so we wanted to innovate our undergraduate program to include elements of that. The previous building didn't really allow us to do that because of the poor lab facilities, among other things. And then finally, as our bandwidth increased, we realized that we wanted to develop more corporate relations as we became more technological, and also develop alumni relations, particularly with our graduate students, because we simply did not have the bandwidth to do that when we were that small. Now, a number of things influenced this. The hiring of Jens Norskov was a big plus in terms of our interest in energy, and we could then essentially use him to nucleate this new Center for Energy Technology and Energy Conversion. We wanted to bridge to other departments and entities on campus because we realized we were a small department and our impact in some sense depended on it. The Shriram Center obviously was a huge, and we knew this was coming online, so we planned for it. And then also we had planned to expand the faculty based on the expansion of chemical engineering as a discipline. I'll now mention a few things that we then did beyond towards the 5-year plan and how we've progressed in these 4 years. First of all, SunCat is now a very growing and viable entity, and it is right in the epicenter of chemical engineering. It lives on the fundamental side of the so-called energy spectrum that Lynn Orr talked about in 2010. And it represents a relationship between SLAC and Chemi that simply didn't exist before. And so now we have shared facilities and shared students from Chemi to SLAC, which has been very positive for us. And this is the intellectual center, from our point of view, of catalytic chemistry as applied to energy on campus. And there are a number of grand challenges that SunCat attacks, and it has theory, synthesis, and characterization all as part of it. And we're very happy that this feeds in to our 5-year plan. Now, why were we natural to do this? Well, more than half of the faculty already was engaged in energy research. So what we really needed to do was to codify that, bring it together, and work across group lines in order to make a viable and world-class effort. And I think we have done that now over the last 4 years. I should say that our new hires, remember we are in the process of growing, reflect the 5-year plan. So Beth Sadley is one of our 2 newest hires. She both makes plants resistant to bacteria attack, and she does delignification. So this is the chemistry of life and the chemistry of energy in one research group. She's a plant biologist and one of the biochemical faculty. And then our latest hire is Matteo Carnello, who makes nanoparticle catalysts. And as you see, he's very engaged in nanoengineering of nanoparticles with the idea of energy production and photocatalysis. So those are the 2 faculty that have been hired underneath our 5-year plan. There are a number of other things we've done within the 5-year plan, and I won't go into many details, but let me talk about the vision here. We have an outreach coordinator that is a staff person who now handles our website, one of our 2 industrial affiliates programs, as well as industrial recruiting on campus, etc. So that has been very successful. We now have a new lab management team to oversee the development of our new lab programs. And again, the old digs had labs that were really laughable compared to these new labs. So we had to essentially re-engage our faculty in understanding lab. And what Lisa and Jeff talk are our spearheads for that. We have also made gains in online education. So we now have 2 certificate programs, a molecular energy certificate program and a biotech certificate program. And this is part of our increasing our bandwidth and impact through online teaching. I mentioned that we have now 2 industrial affiliates programs, one that's SunCat and one that's non-SunCat, so one that's catalytic energy and one that's not. We have a fundraising program that we're in the 2nd year of called Engineering Our Future Fund. and we've raised about $350,000 through that program. And the other thing we've decided as a faculty to do is continue with ABET, but we're redoing this, or we're revamping this, so we're actually basically engaged in understanding and reviewing our own undergraduate program and hope that it fits within ABET. So that's what we're doing, and Lisa's leading that effort. So those are the elements beyond hiring, et cetera. This is our MEET program. We have 5 professors and 2 lecturers engaged in teaching energy as a professional development sequence, and we have roughly about 30 people now enrolled in our MEET program, and it's been growing. And we also have a biotechnology graduate certificate, which is new. This was actually, Genentech actually reached out to us to have this, and so the first year Genentech master's students particularly take advantage of a number of our courses to earn this certificate for training there. So these are, again, part of our 5-year plan, increased industrial activities and technological activities. I mentioned already we have our Engineering Our Future Fund, and we have a 3-year goal for that, and we're well on the way. Let me finish with just some of the successes in terms of statistics. So one thing that's jumped both through our enhanced facilities, our enhanced impact from a faculty point of view, is our return on graduate students. So we're operating somewhere now around 60–65% return. These classes, our first-year classes of PhD students, are in the neighborhood of 20 to 25. If you turn back the clock again, back when we were 8 to 10 faculty, that number was 9. So this is almost trebled in the time that we've been undergoing these changes. And we're now actually the 2nd ranked per faculty member number of PhD degrees awards. So we're happy about that. And at the same time, we are give the 2nd number of declared undergraduate majors per faculty member. The other thing we've worked very hard to do, and I didn't know whether I should show this or not, is this is the amount of our department reserves, and this vector goes to there, and that means we actually made it to the guideline from the School of Engineering. This is a lot of work from a lot of chairs here to get to that point. So we're happy about that. We still aren't, it looks a little bit better than it is because our startup packages are easily the largest in the School of Engineering because of the wet lab facilities. But nevertheless, we're financially solvent and we're in good shape from that point of view. I'll finish with what we discussed at our retreat this year. So this might help the committee a little bit. We talked about what is our strategy for hiring in the next 2 years. Remember, we've hired a couple. We want to hire at least 1 or 2 more. We again decided that we want to emphasize junior hires, but we might examine a strategic senior hire depending on impact area. Our biochemical side of things, now that there's actually at least 2 other 800-pound gorillas in the area of bioengineering, it's Bioengineering Department and Chem-H, we need to examine what our strategy is on the biochemical side of things. And I think right now we're having faculty meetings to decide where we want to grow and what we want to do in the bio side of things. And that is an ongoing discussion in our department. We have, as I mentioned, new industrial affiliates programs, and we're organizing our outreach around those industrial affiliates programs. We don't do anything strategic with our master's program, and we probably should, but it's just been a terminal master's in the past. There's very little transition between our master's program to our PhD program. That's not very well thought out. And we need to revisit that and see whether there's something we can do. For example, we could make it an internship program within our industrial affiliates program, but we don't yet. We need to, again, basically modernize and expand our undergraduate lab offerings now that we have these fantastic labs and now that there's all kinds of modern materials labs that are intrinsic to chemical engineering. And we're looking at that through our lab management team. And finally, we want to continue to build these bridges that I showed you previously in the talk. The natural ones are BioE and Chem-H. But interestingly, after about 2-hour discussion, we realized that one of the bridges that we'd like to fortify is actually the bridge to electrical engineering. And here's why. If you look at the new plan for electrical engineering. I think they call this EE 2.1 or something like that. 21? Sorry. I wanted to put a decimal in it. It's basically a maker's culture, and this fits right in with what chemies do. Chemies basically control molecular interactions to make things for the most part. And so we feel like we could have joint faculty, et cetera, with electrical engineering, which is something we haven't done in the past. So we had a discussion that this is a natural bridge to build beyond the bridges that I think we're going to build with BioE and ChemH. So anyway, I'm finished. That's it. I thought this was a great picture from Jeff. Jeff provided me the double rainbow picture over chemical engineering. Yeah. So thank you very much. Did I go 20 minutes?
Any questions for Eric? Specific questions? People are anxious to get to the one.
Yeah.
Can I just grab the mic for a second? From
Sure.
You'll be around if people have questions.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, go for it.
Actually,
Keep it
it applies to Norwood as well, and that is, so you both talked about food security, agriculture. You know, we don't have an ag problem.
Yeah.
We do have a Center for Food Security and Environment.
Yeah.
It's in the, it's joint between the Woods and the Freeman Scoville Institute. There are people who do worry a lot about food, but not necessarily at the molecular level, but in other really important aspects of it. It seems like, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but it's probably, if we're going to talk about that, you know, I think chemistry and bioengineering, chemical engineering and bioengineering needs to look a little further than just the School of Engineering in terms of, really, if you want to really be about that.
Yeah.
So if you think that's important, I think both departments should look beyond just the school for bridges.
Yeah.
And look beyond.
I believe, and Beth's not here, I believe Beth is already taking advantage of
Beth
that
does.
because, yeah.
But I think there's more capacity.
Yeah. This is a good, as we discuss how we're going to expand in the biochemical aspects of chemical engineering, this is an area that we're going to decide where our biggest impact can be. And it might indeed be continuing to grow in agriculture because we already have a great person here who's taking advantage of this. But it's a good point.
If I could also ask, sort of following on this, for both of you really, are the new institutes, ChemH and the Neurosciences Institute, playing a large role as you think about growth and so forth? I know you've got a search.
So we are now, I think, and these guys as well, you've already hired faculty jointly with ChemH. We right now have a search, and there are 2 candidates in the ChemH search that are part of our search. So the early answer is yes. We hope to have a number of faculty joint with ChemH because it's a natural fit for our biochemical aspects of chemical engineering.
We are not running a search ourselves this year because of the fact that we have linkages to both ChemH and the Neuroscience Institute who are. And the other thing that really facilitates the interactions is geographic proximity.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, ChemH is in our building.
Yeah.
And even when they move, they're just going to be across the street, which is where S&I is going to be. So very much so, we view those as really critical to the growth of bioengineering.
Yeah, when Norbert and I sit on the building leadership team every week, the ChemH Chayton sits there, and we share crosstalk about how ChemH is developing, who's coming, et cetera. So.
Okay.
Okay.
I wanted to just grab the mic for a second here. So now we have a cocktail hour where we all get to talk to each other. And I actually was just thinking about a couple of things that have come up in the last couple of days that I'm going to suggest if you're talking to someone out there and you've run out of conversation topics, you pick up one of these. So the first one is the exercise that I alluded to that we did this morning when the committee met, and Sarah Stein-Greenberg from the D School designed it for us. And maybe you could just say briefly in your words what the exercise was.
Sure. The idea was to
holistically think about impact and what that means across the range of committee members. And one of the things that's really interesting about this process is all of the diverse perspectives and opinions that are feeding into it. So we started by taking 3 minutes to think about a moment or a concrete example of where each individual had seen the School of Engineering or Stanford as a whole having impact in the outside world that was particularly meaningful for that individual, and then proceeded to have some conversation about why that was meaningful to each person, and kind of took it one step further to say, okay, if you were going to author a book about Stanford with this as a key example in that book, what would the title of the book be called? So that was our way of facilitating a conversation about, what is impact, what resonates with each of us about what Stanford Arts does today.
Great. So if you're out there and you're talking to someone, tell them about your moment where you saw some really interesting impact, but you're only allowed 3 minutes to think of it. The other thing you could talk to someone about is something that came up in actually the Civil and Environmental Engineering faculty lunch, and I'm going to pick on Jeff here. When we've talked about this planning process, we've gone, we keep saying we want to break down departmental boundaries. It's not a departmental process, it's a school-wide process, and so on. And so Jeff said, well, you keep talking about that, why don't we just abolish departments? So another thing to think about is, what if we decided to wipe the slate clean, get rid of departments, and start over with the structure of the school? What would be the structure that would best propel us into the future to keep being great and keep having great impact? So that's another discussion topic you could have as we enjoy the second half of this event. So thanks again to the two speakers.